I'm now going to move to the next block, where we're looking at culture for the future of Europe. And as I'm sure you're all aware, there is a large public consultation and engagement process ongoing, looking at what kind of Europe do we want and how do we get there? What's the role of the European institutions, its programs and policies to help people achieve the vision of the Europe they want to live in? And this session is going to pick up on this, and it will also pick up on a point that Loredana made right at the very end, where she said, what's the role of the private sector? We're going to pick up on the role of philanthropy, because foundations are very big players in the culture sector. So we're going to explore in this how they can contribute and facilitate this engagement. But the first, I would like to ask you all a question. We're going to go back to our lovely Mentimeter tool. And the question we're asking, what could a strategic cooperation between the EU and philanthropy bring in the area of culture and creativity? So that's the question we've launched, and we'll be seeing the word cloud in a few minutes. And while we do, people think about that, to give them inspiration, I'm delighted to introduce Gijs de Vries, who's a senior visiting fellow at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and he's going to talk to us to make the silos dance, mainstreaming culture into EU policies. Shall we dance?
Yes. Well, thanks very much, Tante. And how nice to be at this extremely inspiring event. I think we've heard a number of absolutely fascinating contributions. And if there's one thing that unites these interventions, it's really a plea for the European Union to start thinking bigger, to put culture at the heart of the European project instead of occasionally at its political margins. I think that plea is today ever more necessary than before, because the very cultural foundations of Europe, our common values, are being undermined by forces outside Europe, but human rights, human dignity, the rule of law, democracy are also being undermined from within our very cultural foundation. So we need a cultural response to these challenges. And I think there, and that's the link with the Convention on the Future of Europe, that will be popular with Europeans, because let's not forget that 6.5 million Europeans took part in the European Year for Cultural Heritage. The Eurobarometer shows that if you ask us Europeans what we think does most to bring us together as Europeans, we answer culture. It's culture that brings Europeans together at a time when other forces drive us apart. So how can we bring this paradigm shift about to put culture at the very heart of the project? In my paper, I've outlined a number of proposals in the 6 priority areas of the European Commission. Today, I would just like to highlight 3 by means of example: the Green Deal, very briefly, the creative economy, and Europe's role in the world, which is something we have not really been discussing a lot so far. So what does the paradigm shift mean in practice if we want to achieve it? Obviously, our first priority has to be to preserve the planet. And as already been mentioned, culture can help not only by greening itself, the cultural sector still needs to do a lot, but also by raising awareness and by empowering people to take up action themselves. But such policies in the cultural sector are expensive. And yes, it's very good that we now have, as a first step, the European Bauhaus Initiative, but its budget is only 85 million. The real money is elsewhere, in the recovery and resilience plans, for example, where member states are obliged to spend 37% of the more than 600 billion euros they are entitled to on greening measures. Will the European Commission see to it that culture gets its fair share? There's also money in the multi-annual EU budget, 30% of which has to be spent on greening. That is more than 300 billion in the next years. Will the European Commission see to it that culture gets its fair share? And then there is the European Investment Bank that calls itself Europe's Climate Bank. But in the plans of the European Investment Bank, in its strategy, there's hardly any mention of culture. What will the EIB do to help museums, theaters, cinemas, and other cultural institutions green themselves? Second, there is the creative economy. In many European cities, the cultural and creative sector now accounts for 10% of jobs. That is the case in Paris, in Rome, in Milan, in Amsterdam, in Madrid. In Barcelona, it's even 13%. Worldwide, the cultural and creative industries are the largest employer of youth, and they employ more women than men. And that's not even counting the spillover effects on other parts of society, such as cultural tourism, education, or digital services, nor culture's positive effect on public health. So no wonder cities in Europe are really using culture as a driver of sustainable urban development. The EU should make it more of a priority to support them. And that means retrofitting culture into the European Commission's flagship policies, from industrial policy to the action plan on the social economy and also the European Health Union. And why not launch, as the European Cultural Foundation has proposed, an Erasmus for Culture, a visionary initiative to promote cross-border exchanges between artists and other cultural professions. Finally, there is the external dimension. The UN Sustainable Development Goals offer an unprecedented, inspiring path to a world where no one is left behind. The European Union should take the lead in proposing imaginative, international cultural partnerships based on equality rather than on dependency, as in the past. And here the EU could build on President Macron's decision to restitute African artifacts held in French museums. Why not launch a heritage partnership between Europe and Africa as a means to concretely and symbolically work together in this crucial area? Such a partnership could be financed by the EU's Global Fund. And why not create a common European online portal for museum objects acquired in colonial times to complement Germany's initiative in setting up a national database? To conclude, as Europeans, we have created an economic union, a monetary union, and even something of a political union. These are impressive, but they are unions of the head. What is missing is a union of the heart, the cultural union. But to create such a union, one based on unity in diversity, we must first imagine it. We live in a time of growing intolerance and increasing nationalism. Our social fabric is fraying at the edges. So it's essential to restore a sense of unity, a sense of trust and direction, and to reconnect majorities and minorities. And that means we need to imagine a common future. And to imagine and deliver that common European future, we must harness the power of culture. In my paper, I've made a few proposals. They're not exhaustive. They're meant as an invitation. I hope they will be the beginning of a conversation in Brussels and elsewhere.
Thank you very much, Gijs. And you have in your short presentation very much made the silos dance. You've made the case that we're missing the heart and the soul that connects all of these different elements. And I note with interest that you highlighted that the Eurobarometer surveys show that what connects people is culture. And yet, as you say, we live at a time when there are very clear forces using the terminology of the culture wars to try to divide and to polarize a society. And if we just sit back and let it happen, then we will destroy the social cohesion that we had. We must have a cultural response to the challenges that are being deliberately put on our society by different forces. So thank you for that. I think it's a very valuable warning. A reminder to everyone that we opened the Menti, where we wanted to ask you the question, what could a strategic cooperation between the EU and philanthropy bring? And that's linked to the fact that many big players and funders and supporters of the culture and creative sector are philanthropic, they're foundations. So we want to ask for you how you see that to work together to make sure we can deliver on culture. I'd like to now pass the floor to Viviane Hoffmann, the Deputy Director-General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture, which is quite a large portfolio there. And Gijs mentioned how youth and culture and sport, physical activity, urbanism is all connected. But he set out a number of different proposals, and I'm sure you've seen his report. Which ones would you like to take up first, and which ones do you think would be more challenging within an EU context?
Thank you very much. I think that today's dialogue is already an answer to very important questions. That is, it shows how important it is for policy development to bring together ideas and suggestions on the role of culture in our societies and policies. This is more timely than ever. We share a common purpose, namely giving culture a central place in people's daily lives and in Europe's future. What does it mean concretely for our work? It means that we will continue supporting the cultural sector in overcoming the losses it suffered due to the COVID crisis, and we help promote the powerful role that culture can play in the whole spectrum of the European Union's priorities. I want to thank Mr. de Vries for his impressive contribution to the debate on mainstreaming. There is already a good basis. Culture has become part of many EU policies and programs. The European Year of Cultural Heritage in 2018 was a turning point, and its subsequent framework for action still involves 15 Commission departments. To go further, we recently published the Culture EU Funding Guide. This online guide provides information about funding opportunities around 20 EU programs. It shows how culture plays a horizontal role in several Commission priorities already. Let me mention some examples of mainstreaming. Horizon Europe now includes a substantial part which is dedicated to culture, creativity and inclusive society, as was mentioned before, and the European Institute for Innovation and Technology will soon set up a new knowledge and innovation community for cultural and creative industries and sectors. Of course, as was said before, the new European Bauhaus demonstrates the potential of culture to provide sustainability and inclusiveness as part of the action against climate change. The new Creative Europe program, strengthened with a bigger budget, continues to offer space for projects with a strong sustainability dimension as well. We are leading expert work on cultural heritage and resilience to climate change, and also on culture and sustainable development goals. Both will publish their reports later on this year. In the context of Europe's digital transition, among the things we do, we started a structural dialogue on digital audiences through the Voices of Culture platform. Let me finish by highlighting an important novelty, and this refers to one of the ideas that Mr. de Vries has now mentioned. Later this year, a mobility scheme will be set up under Creative Europe with 21 million euros for the next 3 years, building on the iPorternus pilot. This will allow artists and cultural professionals to go abroad for professional development, to find new audiences, to present their work and create with others. We are very much looking forward to this new action, which I believe also reflects the spirit of today's discussion, for which I thank you again.
Thank you very much. And it's interesting to hear which of the ideas have already got traction, and we'll expect to see some concrete outputs very soon. Let me now bring in André Wilkens, who is the director at the European Cultural Foundation. Now, we talked earlier about the role of different actors. What I want to know from you is how the EU and its member states, who are separately funders, and the European philanthropic sector could join forces to foster culture as in the heart of the future of the European Union. How could we strengthen and benefit the EU if we get this collaboration?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I would say that the Cultural Deal campaign in itself, I see as a first step of joining forces. Civil society and philanthropy launched a campaign to include culture in the EU recovery plans and to dedicate at least 2%. Now the European Parliament, the European Commission and many member states agreed and now have at least dedicated 10 billion euros for culture in the recovery plans. In that way, I consider this a very important joint success on the way to a meaningful cultural deal, especially if you compare this, and Gijs has mentioned it, to the relatively marginal role of culture in EU policy and funding so far. Second, a commitment is as good as its implementation. We have seen this with the numerous commitments on climate change, which so far remained mainly on paper. The commitment to the cultural deal needs to make it from paper into action. This is the next big challenge. It needs monitoring and keeping up the political will, and there's a role for civil society and philanthropy. The cultural deal is not just a response to the COVID crisis. That's a very important thing. We live in pandemic times, and COVID helped to focus the attention on the crucial role of culture in managing these pandemic times. But the role of culture for the future of Europe, for Europe as a community of belonging, as a community of values, for growing a European sentiment, goes much beyond the current crisis. In this way, the European Cultural Foundation has been promoting a cultural deal for Europe since 1954. As Gijs de Vries outlined, culture needs to be mainstreamed into EU policies and funding, and not only as a one-off crisis response. The cultural deal does not just apply to governments. That's an important statement. It is a call to all of us, including civil society, businesses, and philanthropy. It is a call for concrete cooperation and joint ventures. The cultural deal in that way is an opportunity to develop new, innovative ways of joining forces for strategic cooperation, for co-design. Concretely, I would propose an annual cultural deal roundtable for public philanthropic cooperation. This should be a practical meeting of co-design and strategic co-funding. The European Cultural Foundation stands ready to work with all those who want to make public philanthropic partnership for the cultural deal happen now and for the future.
Thank you very much, André, for this, again, a reminder that this is a call to action and that the cultural deal is not something that is laid at the feet of governments or even the EU to do. It is a movement that people can engage with and take part on. And again, we encourage you to endorse it and be part of this process. Gijs, if I could just come back to you with a question. What do you see as the main challenges for your proposals? What's going to be the hardest? You mentioned that one of the biggest areas is we're going to have to go back and retrofit some of the big EU programs and initiatives to make sure that culture is in there. Do you think we have the willingness and the political will to do this?
That is, of course, the essential question. And I think that's what this whole conference is about, to put pressure behind that political will. I think there is no doubt that DG EAC is doing its utmost, and it's much to be welcomed. And let me salute once again the excellent leadership of Maria Gabriel personally, who's been wonderful, a great friend to culture, someone whose heart is in the right place and who is pushing for this. But there are more commissioners. What I would like to see is Frans Timmermans give a speech publicly, a high-profile speech about the role of culture in the Green Deal, how culture can help change the hearts and minds for this huge cultural shift that the Green Deal requires in terms of our own behavior. I would love to see Commissioner Schmidt talk about the role of culture in European social cohesion, in bringing people together. I would love to see Commissioner Urpilainen speak movingly and with conviction, as I know she can, about the role of culture in EU development policy, in bringing people together on the basis of the Sustainable Development Goals, where a lot more can be done. For example, and I conclude on that point by that example, the Council has explicitly invited the European Commission several times to come up with an action plan on how culture will be used in EU cultural policy to support the Sustainable Development Goals. The Commission has still not replied. There's now some discussion of a non-paper, but a non-paper is a non-paper. It is not a political response. So I hope this conference will help push in that direction, because we all share that same idea that culture is essential to our values, to what we are as Europeans, and that therefore it should be at the heart of the European project, and that means political support.
Excellent. Thank you very much for such clarity about where we should be looking to see the indicators of change and seeing culture being taken seriously and mainstreamed across the political direction of the Commission. Let's now have a look at what you replied to the Mentimeter when we asked you the question, what was how we could get culture involved in the strategic cooperation between the EU and philanthropy. And we can see there in the middle, we've got this important issue of engagement and inclusion. Funding is in there, but also interesting words as responsibility, and making the connection that artists, who are the ones who are doing the front line of the creative innovation, are very vulnerable. And we touched on that earlier, the working conditions and the possibilities, the career progression that's possible for artists. So this is an area where there could be a strategic cooperation between the EU in philanthropy. So again, thank you all for sharing your different ideas of how we can make this to move forward. I'd like a few more commentators to add their views. Lucia Recalde, the Deputy Director, the Head of Unit for Audiovisual Industry and Media Support Programs of DG CNECT. From the audiovisual media sector, we talked a lot about digitization and technology today. Where do you see the potential for associating foundations into the work of mainstreaming culture in EU policies? Are you ready for partners to work together?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having invited me to take part in this very fascinating discussion. And I would like to focus my intervention in outlining to you our plans to work with foundations on the media sector. Why the media sector? It's very simple, because press, TV, radio, online, audio and audiovisual media are considered the fourth pillar of democracy. They help citizens to make informed decisions and ensure that politicians, institutions and businesses are accountable for their actions. President von der Leyen, in the State of the Union speech in September 2021, she said, media companies cannot be treated as just another business. Their independence is essential. And media need regulation to remain independent, but they need investment to remain viable, because there cannot be editorial independence without financial independence. We know that recently philanthropic organizations have started to invest from their endowments, as well also on the programmatic side in the media sector, as a very specific business to be protected in order to preserve the quality of information and the public debate in Europe. However, neither the public sector nor philanthropy or private sector alone can tackle this challenge. So this is in an area where we believe partnership and pooling of resources makes perfect sense. So in the Media and Audiovisual Action Plan adopted by the Commission in December 2020, the Commission announced an equity pilot through InvestEU that can support the news media sector in innovative ways, co-investing with funds coming from philanthropists, foundations, and other private partners. And in this context, the Commission is currently exploring the launch of a potential co-investment mechanism with foundation and philanthropic organizations around some target mission areas, including media pluralism. And I think this is clearly on our side a recognition of the role played by foundations and philanthropic organizations as driver of innovative approaches to key societal and social and cultural issues in Europe.
Thank you very much for that. Let me also bring in the views of Matteo Bagnasco, who is from the Fondazione Compagnia di Sao Paolo and the co-chair of the European Foundation Centre's Arts and Cultures Thematic Network. We just there heard some messages from the European Commission about potential ways to go forward, but can you give us some insight from national or even regional foundations, how they can contribute to the recovery and the future of Europe conversations?
Thank you very much for your invitation. I will focus on 2 or 3 points in this inspiration panel. First of all, I think one thing that foundation can do at European level, it's work together. For many European foundations, arts and culture represent a focus area of support and investment, since philanthropy's role in the promotion of cultural exchange is progressively growing. We made a survey on that. We have data that are quite impressive on this. So that's the idea for like-minded foundation to come together in European Foundation Center and now Philea Art and Culture Thematic Network, in order to create a safe space for debating, sharing, building, and strengthening knowledge about art and culture through a peer learning method. So work together to have a stronger impact on our territory at European level, but also to have a stronger voice to talk with European institutions. A second point is about the public policies. Despite the private nature, foundations are capable of helping public action in programs for inclusion, education, and social justice through arts and culture. Moreover, thanks to the long-term support to organizations provided by European Foundation, as well to cultural projects, foundations often aim to generate new models that can be extended and replicated in other areas of public space, of public policies. So this, I think it's a value for philanthropy that have more freedom to experiment new models that can be offered at European level. Philanthropic foundations are local key actors for both territory and its community to fully understand and answer their needs. Foundations often collaborated with cities and regions to create cultural regenerative strategies where culture can promote well-being of people, communities, and territories. But nevertheless, foundations seek out adequate solution and specific support to co-creation of policies and activities involving both local and international stakeholders. In fact, I think that the exchange with international organizations is essential to strengthening also local identities to enable the growth of the territory, as well as to potentially scale up the project, as I said before. In that perspective, I think philanthropy can be a connection between the local and the international practice. At the end, I want to underline just one thing, that cultural is not only arts in our meaning. Foster civic participation is an essential element of cultural policy, and also in this kind of topic, European Foundation are debating.
Thank you very much. As we're coming towards the end of our time, I'm going to just squeeze in one last question to Viviane Hoffmann, if I can. We had a very cogent and coherent plea from Gijs at the beginning to say we need to translate the momentum and the ideas behind the cultural deal into political action. And he praised the work of your commissioner specifically, but says it's not going across the rest of the commission, and identified 2 or 3 ways that we would see that culture is mainstreamed. But I'm struck very much by our earlier conversation about the new European Bauhaus initiative, and that this is something that is very much connected to the president of the commission. It's got the political support, even if it's got a small budget. Do you see a way that that could be leveraged to put culture higher up and in a cross-functional way within the Commission agenda? How can we make the best use of that momentum that the new European Bauhaus movement is creating to make sure that culture is more central in the other parts of the Commission?
Well, actually, it's a big question for the few minutes that are left to speak. I think that there is indeed a momentum, and it is a momentum where, as I tried to say earlier on, we can find a place for the role of culture in virtually every Commission priority. And as I also said, there is also already a good basis when we look at climate change, when we look, which is the most prominent example, I think, but also in the other priorities that are much developed in Mr. de Vries's report. Now, what I can tell you as well is that we are now actively preparing in the Commission the debate on the next EU work plan for culture for 23-26. And we are now preparing more precisely a report on the implementation of the current work plan. And this report will include recommendations, and I'm convinced this will be a good basis for the discussion with the member states in view of the adoption of the next plan. And we have observed, especially in the context of the pandemic, but not only, of course, it has exacerbated the problems that were there and made them visible and called for more urgent and indeed sustainable solutions. Now, we have observed that the different EU institutions and stakeholders often voice the same concern when it comes to the needs and challenges of the cultural and creative sectors and to the crucial role, their crucial role in Europe's recovery and more globally in building the future of Europe. So one part of the answer, it's not the whole answer, I think, but one part of the answer would be that I believe we can expect another substantive work plan reflecting the specific needs of culture and its contribution to the overarching political priorities. And we are looking to having this discussion.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let me now bring in Matteo Hoffmann from the European Cultural Foundation, who's been keeping an eye on the chat for us. What can you share with us about the contributions you're seeing from the audience?
Good evening, Tamsin. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to come in now and happy to say that despite this being already quite late time in the evening and all of us being already involved in the conference for quite some time, I'm happy to see there is still a lot of contributions coming in. So of course, with the partners, we are going to think about good ways to use and to share what you have shared with all of us here for the future of Cultural Deal for Europe campaign, because of course, it's the journey that is ongoing. On the topics that were discussed, first of all, on the issue of mainstreaming of culture into EU policies and cultural responses to challenges that Gijs spoke about, there was a discussion happening on how to make sure that culture is not instrumentalized when you think about mainstreaming. But there was a voice saying that it's possible to actually have this cross-sectoral benefits go hand in hand with intrinsic value of culture. They can go hand in hand, and we can unite these concepts. What was also pointed out is that we have to think about culture in terms of awareness of aesthetics that we share to support next generations. This is very important also when we think about what culture and culture policy can do. There was a question asked, since we have this policy coherence, for instance, for development aid or environment policies, shouldn't we have the same for culture? And of course, the answer is that this is very much the goal of Cultural Deal for Europe as such. There was also a number of other comments, namely how cultural institutions can play a role. How do we achieve culture that is both inclusive and celebrating diversity? There was also some very specific pledges made on that topic about bringing back the United Kingdom back into the heart of EU where it belongs, or a very specific pledge too on Europe Day, 9th of May, which should be celebrated as a big public holiday across Europe with all the citizens. On the topic of how philanthropic sector can work hand in hand with the EU, there was a suggestion that supporting grassroots cultural sector working with the younger generations is a great way to also create, foster peace and understanding. But there was also a word of cautiousness about the so-called strategic partnerships, so that we have to make sure that the role of non-for-profit is not hijacked or compromised by partnering. So of course, in that sense, it's very important to think about strategic goals from all the sides, from the philanthropy, but also from the public sector. So all in all, and I think this is also one of the arguments which was being repeated in the chat, is that the things which were discussed in that sessions are very much a hard task for all of us on the policy level, on the civil society level, on the foundations level. So of course, this is the good, I would say, the last key message. Cultural Deal for Europe continues, and we very much encourage you to stay connected and to help shape it. And this is, I think, also one of the messages that was shared in the chat. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matteo.